Okay, this seems to be working now. Hope it's not going to be jinxed. Seems to be working. Let's not jinx it. I just want to make sure that it's working on my YouTube channel. Okay, I'm live.
It's a gift. Welcome.
Let me just post to my Facebook group really quick. We've been having some major technical difficulties tonight. So let me just make sure this is still working. And I hope that it is. I think it is. So we're going to just go ahead and move forward. So this would typically be in my Facebook group. I would be doing a Facebook Live video. But because Facebook wasn't cooperating and my video wasn't cooperating, we're going to be doing this over here on YouTube. And it's been a minute since I've posted over here. And I'm excited to be back. So today I'm going to be sharing 5 different techniques to use with the wet and wet technique. And over in my Facebook group, which I will post a link for it down in the description box below if you'd like to join. But we're going to be doing a painting challenge every month. And this one is for October, but I know it's still September, so this is the challenge for September, October, and then we'll be going into doing a challenge every month. And then everyone in the group can post their work just right in the Facebook group and ask for feedback, and it's a lot of fun. We have a really great community over there. So the first one I want to start out with is I'm going to start with some plain water. And I'm just going to fill in my leaf shape, okay, so let me explain really quick. The challenge for the month of October is to use the wet and wet technique and to paint something fall inspired. So you don't have to paint leaves like what I'm doing here, but you can paint pumpkins or flowers or anything that screams fall to you. The only catch is to use the wet and wet technique. So I'm just sharing a few different ways that I like to use the wet and wet technique. Alright, so I filled in my leaf shape with water, and now I'm going to go in and just drop some color right on the edges and just kind of let the color bleed out into the rest of the leaf. And you may need to use a little extra color like this one. I needed to use a little more color because it wasn't quite saturated enough and it looked a little washed out. So I'm going to use a little bit of Scarlet Lake. And I'm just kind of dotting my paint along the edges here. And then I'm not kind of pushing my color around or anything. I'm just letting the color flow where it wants to flow. There's some isoindolin yellow, which looks really close to the mix I already used. So I'm going to use, let's see, I think this is Bordeaux. It's kind of more of a purple color. Okay, and then I'm just going to let my paint dry just like that. I'm not pushing the color around, I'm just letting it kind of go where it wants to, and that's kind of the magic with the wet and wet technique. Okay, now for this next one, I'm going to start with a light wash. So instead of just clear plain water, this wash is going to have a little bit of color in it. But I am using a lot of water because I still want that same effect. And I will say that the success of this technique, a lot of it depends on the paper you're using and how much water you're using. So it is a lot of trial and error. So just play around with your supplies. Maybe the water or the paper that you're using requires that you use more water. Maybe it doesn't. So just play around with it and see what you can get. Okay, now I'm going to just tap in a little bit of color here on the edges and kind of get that fall feel. I'm going to mix in a little bit of green to my red so it's not quite so vibrant. And then again, I'm just going to leave it and let it dry just like that. Actually, changed my mind. I'm going to add a little bit of this red right here to the tip of this leaf, just so it really stands out. Okay, for this next technique, I'm going to start with one color. I'm going to start with an orange. And again, this is pretty wet paint. And now instead of going back and reaching for that orange, I'm going to reach for yellow. And I'm just going to overlap the two colors a little bit so that they can bleed together. And then I'm going to do a third color here. Use this peach. This is Jaune Brilliant 2 by Holbein. I'll have all the colors and everything I'm using linked down in the description box below as well. So that one, the transition's a little bit harder to see just because these colors are pretty close. So I'm going to use a darker color. Let's use this alizarin crimson. And just let those two kind of bleed together. Now this would have a better transition if I had made this color really, really wet. So I don't suggest going back over the top and doing this, but I'm going to just to help those colors bleed together a little bit more. All right, now for this one, I'm going to use quinacridone rose. And I'm going to change up the color of my leaf as I go, but that's definitely not required for this technique. You can use one solid color, you can change up the color like what I'm doing. Whatever you feel like. The point is I'm just going to hurry and fill in my leaf. And I'm keeping the paint pretty wet. And then I'm going to go back over the top with just some plain water and drop in a few drops of just plain water. You can squeeze the bristles gently like what I'm doing, or you can tap the brush to get some drops of water. This will create kind of a little bit of a bloom, which you can kind of see in here. Depending on how much water you use, you'll get a larger bloom like what's happening here. But it's kind of a fun technique. Okay, and last, I'm going to use a color with a little bit less water. I'm just going to outline my leaf here. This is sap green. And then while the paint is still wet, that's really important here, I'm going to go in and fill the rest of my leaf. I'm just kind of blending the two edges, but I have a little bit more control over where the color is just because I painted that outer edge beforehand. So rather than dropping in paint afterward up here, I've dropped in the middle down here, so it's kind of gradually fading in. And with all of these techniques, you can always go in and drop in color wherever. It does not have to be just on the edges. And now I'm just going to wait for these to dry all the way. And then I'm going to finish these off with a little bit of detail. So I think this one's still pretty damp. I've got a little tiny blow dryer here. I'm just going to whoops. I was going to say I don't recommend this for this technique because it kind of pushes the paint out, and it does that exactly. So it kind of splatters the paint everywhere when you've used a lot of water, but just for the sake of time, I'm going to quickly dry this. Okay, I'm going to let these dry kind of on their own because they were starting to be a little bit of a mess. So I'm just going to turn this so that I can easily work on this one. And I'm going to grab a smaller brush. This is a size 4. Yep, it's a size 4. And I'm going to use alizarin crimson here. I'm also going to pull a little bit of raw umber violet. And I'm going to start here on the stem. And what's nice about going over the top to layer in later is you can really make it look really nice and finished off. Even though the underneath layer is kind of messy, you can really make it look nice. I'm being careful not to get up in this area because I can see that my paint is still a little bit wet. Okay, now I'm going to move to this one, and I'm using more of my Perylene green. I'm going to mix that in. It's made almost a dark gray color. And I don't typically like to mix my cool colors on this side of my palette. So that's why there's that dark splotch now, but that's okay. So again, I'm starting with my stem and then moving up through the middle of this leaf. I want this to be a little more green. There we go. And I'm not going for realism or anything here, just kind of playing around with veins. Okay. And I got my arm right in the paint. That happens too. So I'm going to turn this so I don't do that again. So you can see in here, I don't know if you can see that very easily, but the water just kind of spread the paint around and created these really fun blooms. And I'm not going to paint veins everywhere, just in these. This is still quite wet, so I'm going to leave that one alone. But just for the sake of time, I'm going to move forward with this. Again, not going for realism, just kind of adding veins where I feel like it. So there you have it. I showed you 5 ways to use the wet and wet technique. And if you would like to join the Facebook challenge for this month, I'll leave a link down in the description box below, and I cannot wait to see what you create using this technique. And I can't wait to see your fall paintings as well. It's going to be a lot of fun. So thank you so much for joining me. I'm so glad that this video finally worked, and I will see you guys in a little bit. Thanks again for watching. Bye.